Hello friends, welcome back to DIY guitar making here at Eric Schaefer Guitars. If you like what I do here and you, I don't know, get something out of it, then hey, you can find more of stuff like this at ericschaeferguitars.com. I have online guitar building courses that you can take, and you can register to sign up for one of my hands-on workshops, which, by the way, I have one starting on March 8th, just coming up this week. This video might go out after that point anyway. And besides, I've already closed off access to that March 8th class because it's too close. But go ahead, check the schedule. There's other workshops later in the year if you're interested in signing up. In fact, this year I actually have workshops scheduled for the summer because over the many years that I've been doing this, you guys have been constantly asking for summer dates, and I have not given you them. The dates have always been in the spring and in the fall. So there you have it. There's actually some summer classes on the schedule now, and there's some availability in them, so sign up. What else do I have going on before we get into Q&A? Guitar number 116 has been moving along at an absolute snail's pace because I've just been busy with so many other things, both in the shop and at home and yada yada. I just made a video finishing the mold, which I have right here, so check out that video if you want to see how I made this mold. And that's basically where I'm at. If you've been watching the other videos, you've seen I've got the fretboard kind of roughed out and the neck, but really not much else. So barely making a dent on that build. I'm hoping after this workshop coming up, I'll be able to really dig into it in earnest, and then eventually move on to the dreadnought that I want to do as well. So lots to do, not enough time. It's kind of how this thing goes. All right, let's get into your Q&A then. So first things first, we're going to go into the Discord channel, and that's where the private members forum is. The way that you get access to the private members forum, by the way, it's private, hence the word private, is by signing up for one of my online courses. Then you can become a member of the members forum. And then after, as per usual, after we go through some of the comments and questions in the members forum, we'll jump over to YouTube and get some of your comments and questions over there as well. All right, so why don't we first start with the question of the week, which is, let me find it here. Okay, this is a good one. Question of the week is, what do you do with your scrap wood? And then I also wrote, do you burn it, use it? If so, what do you use it for? Or collect it like a Depression-era hoarder for a hypothetical project that will never come? Because I know a lot of people do that as well. So anyway, let's get into your answers here. Patrick writes, I burn some of it and save some of it to use for rosettes. That's actually great. I use my scrap wood for rosettes as well, although I often make my solid wooden radial rosettes out of the scrap portions of the back for that particular project, which in that case doesn't require saving the wood for later, but rather just using it before you throw it out or use it for something else. Lamar's Guitars writes, when you generate as much as Eric does, you certainly see burning it. I'm on a much smaller scale, and I've found there is no scrap so small or oddly shaped that it won't find a use. If you can't think of the use, throw it out, and next week you'll stumble on the perfect use for it. As Stephen King might say, they're needful things. A more direct answer would be for rosettes, inlays, shims, and test samples to see how a particular wood will take a stain/dye. Yes, I love that you mentioned test samples, because just having a couple varieties of the common woods lying around, even just pull them aside once you have, you know, a piece of mahogany, a piece of walnut, a piece of ebony, rosewood, pull those aside, put them in a drawer, and you'll always have them, a couple samples, so you can test finishes and things like that, and dyes. That's a great idea. but then burn the rest. That's just me though. He goes on how a particular wood will take a stain/dye. He also writes, except wood burning. Okay, except wood. Oh, how it will accept wood burning. Okay, if you're doing wood burning, and also how much detail you can route into it, etc. Okay, yeah, because some woods might fuzz up too much if you try to get use really fine bits for inlay routing or something like that. That makes sense. So test samples. Some will eventually get put into a form that will be flooded with epoxy to make solid bodies, furniture, and other projects. That's pretty cool. So he makes electric guitars, as a lot of you guys do. And I suspect that electric guitar makers find a lot more use for scrap wood than acoustic guitar makers, if only because electric guitar makers are more freed up to follow their aesthetic muse, if that makes sense. Let's see. Larry Kuhn writes same as Lamar's guitars, so he agrees with him. Someone's honking their horn out there. LC Guitars just puts a picture of his burning wood stove. I like that. Burn, baby, burn. I like that. Doc Brown writes, I save it for a while and use it for something. Once the pile gets too big, I drop it off at the recycle center. They use it to make mulch. Okay, that's really cool. I like that. Yeah, return it to the earth. Rob writes, I save it, separate it into bins. If I burn it, I'd surely have a need for it the very next week. Once I get in a mood, in air quotes, I clean it all out and off to the fire pit. You know, that is actually basically what I do as well. I like to say I burn it all very, carelessly, but honestly, it does build up. And once sort of my bins are full, then I burn everything in the bin, knowing that those bins are almost immediately, this very same week, going to start filling up with the next round of scrap wood. So I kind of always have new scrap wood coming in, and there's not a great need to keep all of it all the time. In fact, let me give you guys a little tour of my scrap wood bins. And also I could show you some other things I use it for, which I didn't hear mentioned in here, and I did want to mention, which is your shop, your tool storage and organization and shelving and stuff like that. That's where a good amount of my rosewood and mahogany and other scrap bits end up. In fact, the shelf that this camera is sitting on right now, I'm staring at it, it's a piece of mahogany from an offcut from cutting out the heel. Okay? So here, let's go on a little tour. Yeah, see, there's that little shelf. I can see some mahogany. I use mahogany a lot because it's just a very reliable wood for anything. Here's a mahogany shelf up here. This is all 2x4s, so that's not from guitar scrap. Oh, this is scrap right here. These bits I built this chisel holding shelf out of. And these, anytime in my shop that you see these L-shaped brackets, which I kind of have all over the place. Here's a mahogany L-shaped bracket right here. Those are all offcuts from the heel. Whenever I cut out a heel block, I always get this little L-shaped piece. And in these cases, it's not even that I don't even reshape these to fit anything. I just find places that these brackets work, and I use them. Let's see, I got, this is more scrap wood right here. Some L-shaped brackets from mahogany. Oh, here's a scrap piece that I just screwed into the wall. Basically a side set that was cracked and not usable. And put a bunch of dowels in it and made a hanger for a variety of tools. So here's one of the bins where stuff collects. There's a lot of cardboard in there right now, but below that cardboard, trust me, there's a lot of scrap as well. Mostly the stuff that falls off of this small bandsaw. If we go back here, we're going to find a lot of scrap. This scrap bin is basically scrap from cutting out brace blanks. So it's a lot of small, skinny bits of spruce that weren't quite big enough, or the grain was too rifty, too rift sawn to use. And so it ends up in here. And I often find uses for this. So this is the kind of thing where I will let this build up and then I'll burn some of it. But often I will grab things from there to make little shelves or do other projects around my house, or when sometimes they end up on other guitars as well. Here's another scrap bin. A lot of this comes from the waste off of the back and the sides and off of the tops, because it's whatever falls off of this bandsaw here. And that's pretty full right now, so I'll probably burn that soon. Alright, you know, I should do a full, I think I will, do a shop tour video soon. One, because a lot has changed here, and also there's a lot of cool things we could talk about as far as organizing your shop to be efficient, to inspire creativity, and, well, that's basically it. What more do you want out of a shop? To be efficient and to inspire you to build. All right, and I think that's it for the question of the week. So let's jump on to your other questions and comments now. Okay, so Richie writes, last year when I started guitar making, I ordered my supplies from LMI. One of the things I liked about them was their varying choices of services. You could order bent sides, radius fretboards, etc. Now that they are closed, is there anyone out there performing these services? Specifically, bending sides. I am sure I could build the jig and purchase the required heating materials. However, building one guitar a year as a hobby doesn't seem to warrant it. This biggest issue is space, sharing my workshop with a car. Okay. And then he writes, sounds like a business opportunity for someone. Yes, I completely agree with that. And I don't know the answer to his question because I don't personally have a need for ordering those services. But Patrick down below mentioned Stu Mack, and yeah, he's right. Stu Mack does some pre-bending and things like that, but it is a little bit limited. Nobody is doing it quite like LMI is, at least as far as I know. But I'm just going to put Richie's question out there. Perhaps someone in the forum or elsewhere on YouTube knows of a good source for having services done to your materials when you purchase them. Yes, Patrick writes, Dumac sells already bent back and sides, but your choices are very limited from them. Doing just one a year, I'd suggest bending them by hand using a pipe heated with a blowtorch. Yes. And so this was kind of an old question, and Richie has actually moved on from this because he writes, I am going to build a bending machine. What has it, so he's given up on searching, I guess, and he writes, what has everyone found to be the best heating element? Patrick writes, this is what came with the one I bought from Blues Creek Guitars, and it's by a company called ProTherm. I have the same exact thing. I also bought mine from Blues Creek Guitars, and so I can attest to that. Those work great. I have 4 different bending machines that I built back there with 4 different heating blankets, and they're all these ProTherm heating blankets. No complaints about them. And then he also mentions this router variable speed control dial, which you can get from Harbor Freight. I have that same speed control dial as well. That's so you can control the temperature on your heating blankets, because if you just plug the blankets in, they will continue to heat up until they basically burn themselves out and destroy themselves. So that's sort of a must-have tool there. And yes, it is a router speed controller. It's really meant for routers, but it works just the same. It's just controlling the power that is fed to whatever device you plug into it. So it works just as well with a heating element. Another question from Richie here, or a comment. Just watched Eric's video on making a walnut rosette. What a coincidence. Here's mine that I made last week out of local walnut. And he's got 3 views of it. 1 roughing it out, 2 the cutout, and 3 installed in a red cedar top. I don't know if I would use red cedar again. It is very soft. Yeah, red cedar is softer than spruce, and it's also more brittle. The brittle nature of it, I think, frustrates woodworkers more so even than its softness. You got to be careful with red cedar. It's a nice wood. I prefer it. I like to use it, but it can be a bit fraught with challenges. And I love that he commented this, because recently in a different Q&A, I had mentioned that someone had emailed me about using my Radial Rosette Maker jig, and they were asking a question about how exactly do I keep the grain lined up dead on center with the jig for every single piece that I cut out. And I had responded to him, one, giving him an answer of how to do that, but then also questioning him and asking, are you sure you even want to do that? Because there's some beauty in actually letting the grain drift around a little bit. And if you look at the picture that Richie here has of his, this illustrates this very well, because his grain is wandering all over the place and it looks really cool. That's a part of the effect of this rosette. Now, you might not want to have yours wander as much as he has here. Maybe you don't want the effect that he got. I like the effect that he got. But maybe you want it a little bit straighter. Even still, you probably don't want it perfectly, every single segment perfectly aiming towards the center of the sound hole. It looks a little too sterile in a way, less wild, less like a real wood if the grain is perfect. That's part of the reason why we find beauty in wood as a material, is its imperfections, its wildness, right? It being a real material and not a homogeneous material like, I don't know, particle board or something like that. So I'm glad this came up, because it's what I was trying to explain in a previous video. And I'll throw the other pictures up here. It looks really nice, Richie. That's cool. And use a local wood, that's even cooler. Okay, Lamar's Guitars is a great question about thicknessing backs. He writes, I have a practical question about thicknessing backs. Why would we go to much effort to sand backs to a specific thickness? It seems generally accepted that back and side woods don't contribute much to the sound of the guitar compared to the top, and you generally want to get those to be pretty rigid. He's saying the back and sides you want to be pretty, well, he's saying the sides you want to be pretty rigid, not the back. Not necessarily, we'll talk about that. Going on with his question, so wouldn't any reasonable thickness, like 0.1 to 0.25 inches, be okay for the back? 0.25, I'm not sure if he means, when he says 0.25, I think he might intend to say 0.125, which is a quarter or an eighth of an inch. Yeah, 0.25 is a quarter inch, and that would just be absurd. But anyway, saying wouldn't any reasonable thickness like 0.1 to, I'm going to say 0.125, be okay for the back? And then he writes, I realize some people tune their backs like they do their tops, though I've never really understood going to that effort, since the back will be muted by its contact with your body, but setting that aside, why sweat getting the back to a specific thickness? So there's a lot here. Let me address a couple things. First of all, the back shouldn't, at least not in a to any large extent, it should not be contacting and muted by your body. A little portion of the left side of the lower bout of the back will be muted in contact with sort of your ribs right here, just a little bit, but more so you're kind of resting on where the kerfing is, so you're not actually muting the back much. And that's if you're holding it correctly. Now, if you're playing with a strap and standing up and the whole thing is just flat against your belly, then absolutely the back is doing nothing. I mean, it's truly muted if you're playing it like that. But typically an acoustic guitar, well, maybe not typically, it depends on who you are. If you're a gigging musician, that just might be the case that you're standing up with a strap on all the time. But, you know, a lot of acoustic guitar players aren't using a strap at all and they're sitting down. And the correct way of playing the guitar should involve the guitar kind of traveling at a slant like this, the back traveling at a slant, so it's not fully pressed up against your belly. Again, just a small portion closer to where the kerfing is, not so much the active portion is being muted. Okay, I just wanted to throw that in there, first of all, because you mentioned that. Now, let's see if we can really dig into your question here. And actually, I'm going to read Phil's response first, because I think it was a very good response, and it's mostly what I wanted to say. Phil writes, so I am sort of new to building. I am on my 4th build. I am older and retired, so I have done a lot of research. And he mentions Trevor Gore and Samaji. I've done a lot of research because I want to get what I want out of my builds. It all depends on what you want from the back of the guitar. If you want a reflective back, leave it thick, and it will give the guitar more volume. If you want the wood to contribute more tonal characteristics to the sound, then thin it down. Gore has a bracing pattern for a live back, and I believe on one of Eric's parlor guitars he uses a lattice pattern because he was hoping the back would vibrate better. So I use the lattice bracing pattern actually on a lot of my bigger guitars like the OM. It's sort of a lattice on the parlor, but the parlor is so small that I don't want to use that many different interlocking joints on the back because it would actually make it too stiff. But to his point, yes, I use a lattice a lot for the purposes of having a resonant back, a live back, rather than a reflective back. He goes on, pretty much the bracing pattern will help, but the real issue is that the guitar back needs to be thin enough and braced lightly enough to vibrate from the amount of energy it gets from the string in the top. I thickness to 90,000ths of an inch or less, but not much on my backs if I want them to contribute more to the sound. Excuse me. This is not all there is. I hope someone else will chime in. Yes, that's very good. That was the first thing I wanted to mention, is the difference between having a reflective back and what he calls a live back. I usually call a resonant back. That's the same thing. You want the back to be sympathetic with the top, and the top is being directly moved by the strings, right? And then the sympathetic back only indirectly moved by the top. That's a resonant back. With a reflective back, just think raw power. That's the idea. So do you want complexity or do you want raw power? And I actually think that decision is fairly important to your overall output, or to what you're trying to get out of your guitar. Now, with that said, I have always said that the back, and certainly the sides, but let's just talk about the back here. The back is by far a smaller contributor to the tone than the top. Or at least, put another way, your efforts are much better spent working on the bracing and the thickness of the top than concerning yourself with, putting too much of your energy into tapping and voicing the back, essentially. So I completely agree with that. However, the simple distinction, deciding for yourself, do you want a reflector or a resonator, that will actually have a pretty big difference. It's just, I think if you've chosen to have a resonator and then you're going to spend a great deal of time and a lot of thought into how you carve the braces and perhaps tapping them and tap tuning them and all that, it's not a bad thing to do for sure. But if it comes at the expense of anything else, then again, you're just better focusing on the top, if that makes sense. Anyway, so the point is, I wouldn't just, if you don't want a reflector, then I would not, as Lamar's guitar said, I would not simply leave it massively over thick because it doesn't matter. In that case, it does matter. Again, if you wanted a resonator, you would end up with a reflector. I hope that I hope that makes sense. Well, I'll just tell you what I do, I guess, to make more sense of it. I thickness essentially to a range, which is 100 thousandths of an inch to 120 thousandths of an inch. Okay, and usually a little closer to 100 thousandths of an inch. But as long as I'm kind of in that ballpark, I might flex the wood a little bit because it's going to vary from piece to piece. But in general, I just situate myself in that ballpark and then brace the top and carve the braces. And I do just give it a little bit of a tap and maybe take a little bit more off, but it's really not any more complicated than that. And that gives me a good resonator. I don't build guitars to be a reflector. If I did, it would be a lot simpler because I could just do everything to predetermined numbers and say I would probably just, I don't know, leave the back at 130 thousandths of an inch or something like that, and then just slap some braces on there, carve them in a formulaic way, and call it a day. In every case, I would get a nice stiff back, and that's all I would need. So I hope that answers your question. It's not as with all tonal things, it's not the answer, but that's my perspective on it. I agree with his distinction between asking yourself, do you want a live back or a resonator? All right, let's move on from that. And the next question is basically continuing the same theme and extrapolating it out to the top. Larry Kuhn writes, I thought this would nicely complement Lamar's post on thicknessing backs. I'm building my first non-spruce top guitars, one redwood and one cedar. Good for you, those are fantastic woods. For those of you who have not built with these woods, what initial thickness do you sand to before bracing and voicing? I'm guessing a little thicker than spruce, but I don't want to rely on a guess. Thanks. Yes. Put shortly, yeah, just a little bit thicker. And the reason I do redwood and spruce a little bit thicker is because they're, as we mentioned earlier, they're a little bit more challenging woods. It's a little more brittle and a little softer, especially the western red cedar. So I feel better knowing that there's a little more thickness there. Kind of like I mentioned for the backs. Now again, this isn't the only way to do it. I'm just giving you what I do. Over time, I have sort of evolved into a situation where I thickness my tops. Let's say it's a spruce top, I thickness them to anywhere between 110 thousandths of an inch and 125 thousandths of an inch. Sort of a wide range there. And once I'm within that range, sometimes I don't even check it with calipers, by the way, because when you get used to this, you can just eyeball and tell, okay, I'm in that range. Then I might flex it if I'm worried about that at all. Sometimes I might not. Once I'm in that range, then it's good to go, and I will put the rest of my voicing effort. I don't put a great deal in the beginning. I will put my voicing effort much later on when I'm actually carving the braces. Because in my mind, the thickness of the back, within reason, within sort of the narrow band that I just laid out, the thickness of the, I'm sorry, I said back, the thickness of the top does not have to be exact because I'm voicing the braces. So it's kind of like, if it's a little bit thicker than a different top or a little bit thinner, that's just a different starting point. And when I go and tap the first time, once I've got my bracing pattern on there, I might realize, oh, I've got a little more ways to go with thinning out the braces. Again, other people will tell you, okay, you should go to this very precise thickness and do it the same every single time. But, they might be doing less of a voicing effort on when they're carving the braces, right? So there's kind of no right answer there. It's just different methods of getting to a similar result. All right. So again, when I do spruce tops, my range is 110 thousandths of an inch to 125. As long as I'm within that range, often as I'm sanding, there'll be like a ledge at the join between the book match or something like that, maybe a deep scratch. I'll just be watching that deep scratch, and once I've sanded through that, then I'll kind of look at the thickness, and if I'm in the thickness range, okay, I'm good to go, and I'll put it aside for later work. But you asked about redwood and western red cedar. Redwood, I've only done a couple redwood tops, so I don't really have much to say about that. I don't have like a set procedure. I've done a lot of western red cedar though, and I can say that the western red cedar, I always leave it a little bit thicker than my spruce tops, so I'll err closer to that 125 thousandths of an inch. I might even go a little, dare I say, bigger than that and do 130 thousandths of an inch. Which isn't much bigger, but you know, to some of you guys, you know, that 5 thousandths of an inch can actually make a pretty big difference. So that's basically it. Yeah, leave it a little thicker. I would agree with that. What do you guys do? This is a great kick it out to everybody else, and you can tell me you're doing something completely different from what I'm doing, and honestly, that's great. You can tell me I'm crazy for what I'm doing it my way, and that's also great. All right, let's do some shared progress here. Patrick writes, Patrick is always he's the most efficient builder in the forum, I'd say, at least, you know, who's actually posting stuff. It's pretty bewildering, actually, how much progress he seems to be getting done on a daily and weekly basis here. Patrick writes, starting on number 4 while the finish dries on number 3, I also remade my plate gluing jig, and he's got a picture of it there. It's the type of plate gluing jig that utilizes wedges and rope, different from what I use, which is the joining board method. And then Patrick also writes, trying something new, I trimmed the sides using a template before I bent them. The inside layer is rosewood and is trimmed a little oversized. After they are bent and laminated, I can just trim the inside edges to meet the outside lamination with a block plane. The final thickness after they are laminated is just under 4 millimeters. Okay, that's great. So he's doing laminated sides, by the way. For you guys who don't know, laminated sides are kind of, you know, the coolest thing since sliced bread right now. A lot of builders are laminating their sides. I know laminated wood sounds like a bad thing because technically, I mean, that's plywood. But I think laminated sides really are the way to go. Now, I'm saying that and I don't even do laminated sides. I like what I do. I'm just very used to it, kind of, I guess you could say, set in my ways with doing the side struts, side braces, sort of the old school way. But a lot of guys are doing laminated sides today, and I don't mean big companies. I mean well sought after boutique builders, simply because it gets the sides very rigid, which is actually what you want. Patrick writes, more progress here. He writes, here's something I've been trying out. It's from a company called Easy Inlay. It's crushed up man-made Opal. How do I say that? I'm not sure. Is it Opal or Opal? It comes in several colors. You just fill the cutout with the grains and then fill with thin CA glue and sand. Using it for purfling might be difficult because sanding it is a pain. I think I'm going to use it for fret markers. One major drawback is that it is expensive. Those small containers were $20 a piece. Ouch. I'm tripping over my words today. A piece. All right, cool. Well, thank you for that. I'll throw the picture up there that you have. And Lamar's Guitars answers, Patrick Kearney writes, I like the idea of this, and I've tried this and similar products like quartz with mixed results. The pieces were big enough that you have a cobblestone or gapped appearance. Sometimes that works, sometimes it doesn't. It can be mitigated using a sand or flake version of the product or mica powder, but you might or might not like that appearance either. And the finer the product, the more the issue I had with static electricity. The little specks like to jump out of the pocket. Or when you try to apply CA glue, the glue droplets can hop off and splash, taking particles with it onto the surrounding board. I had to be very careful wicking in the CA from the edges, which means you have to deal with CA on the board surrounding the inlay. As you say, sanding can be difficult. If you start sanding without a sufficient amount of CA in the pocket, I've had pieces pop out. Still an interesting technique that probably has a time and place, but there sure are some devils in the details. True that, Lamar. I've got nothing to add to that. Beautifully said, and I can relate to a lot of the things he was saying, actually. Not particularly with that material that they mentioned, but with other similar materials. Okay, I think that's pretty good for the private members forum on Discord. Let's jump over to YouTube. Okay, Rick Essidjern writes, does the shooting board guide the plane to keep the cut straight? So this was a video where I was cleaning up at the edge of a fretboard on a shooting board. And no, that's not what a shooting board does. So the shooting board just simply gives you squares up your edge, keeps it reliably square to the lower shelf of the shooting board. Okay, as long as your plane is set up correctly. But it's not guaranteeing that the cut travels in a straight line. That's not the purpose of a shooting board. Marcus Burnett writes, this came just in time. He's speaking about a recent Q&A video that I did where we talked about sharpening, chisel sharpening. This came just in time as I'm now looking to move to a new sharpening system from Scary Sharp. And then he corrects me also, or not corrects, he makes a comment here. Also primary, secondary, and tertiary bevel, because I was struggling to describe a 3-bevel system on a chisel. I don't know why I didn't think to just call it the primary, secondary, and the tertiary. I was making up crazy terms like the primary bevel, the micro bevel, and the super micro bevel. But I like his better. Primary bevel, secondary bevel, tertiary bevel. It works. Keep it simple. Rip Benson writes, have you ever modified bracing on an existing guitar to obtain a more pronounced bass response? If so, which braces would you shave down? No, I have never done that. It's a bit tricky trying to just get specifically what you're after there without, you know, negatively impacting other things. But let me, I don't want to get too deep in, I could really go deep with this question, and one, I'm tired, and two, so I don't feel like I'd do it justice, but also I just don't want to go there. But I do want to do this. Let me give you one simple thing that's not complicated that you can do if you're willing to do it to absolutely give you more bass response, and that is to make your sound hole more constricted, to make it smaller. Now, I know it's like, how do you make, you could make it bigger by sort of cutting it out, making it larger, but how do you make it smaller? You can do that with essentially a sound hole graft, like a thin piece of spruce or some softwood material like that, that is just grafted right onto the inside of the sound hole, or you know, a binding like inlay around the edge of the sound hole, some way of tightening up that sound hole to make the aperture smaller will absolutely give you more bass response. And in a much more reliable way than anything else, than any sort of targeting of specific braces. Now, whether or not you're willing to do something like that, which of course is also going to affect the way it looks on the outside, that's up to you to decide. But you asked the question, and that's just immediately what springs to mind for me. Paul Cuddy writes, "Hi Eric, not sure if you follow some old threads like this one. Anyway, I have a comment and a question on abalone purfling. I watched many channels, all of them promote the use of the teflon strips. Now the problems for me, they are difficult to procure in Europe and the sizes are imperial, and that does not seem to correspond with metric sizes of abalone strips I found. Now, the thing is, I am sure guitars in abalone existed long before DuPont invented Teflon. So the question is, how was it done before? Do you have any experience doing this without Teflon strips? I understand it might be more complicated and longer to do, but as amateur luthiers, we are not in a hurry. Can you elaborate on that? Thanks in advance." That's a very good question, Paul Cuddy. I unfortunately am also one of the many people who simply just uses the Teflon strips, and I haven't really given much of a thought as to how they would have done it before Teflon strips, because you're absolutely right. Teflon strips are not ancient, and installing mother of pearl is, you know, an old technique. So I want to put that out there to the rest of you guys, because honestly, I don't know. I could speculate right now on what you could do without the Teflon strips, but that's just what I've always done. And you know what? I'm not even going to speculate right now. Let's revisit this. I'm hoping someone out there on YouTube or within the members forum has some insight on this, because that's a very good question, Paul. Thank you. Thank you for putting it out there. And I think that's all I'm going to do. Does it matter where the pin is? Okay, I'm not. That's okay. Yeah, that's all I'm gonna do. I think we're good. We covered a lot today. I had fun. All right. Thank you guys for tuning in, and I got nothing else to say. I think I covered all the housekeeping on what is going on here in the shop in the beginning of this episode. So we'll just end it right here. I appreciate you guys. I'll see you in the next one. Bye for now. If you learned something here, please give this video a like and subscribe so you can be notified when I release a new DIY guitar making video. And if you want to really learn more, take one of my structured online courses at ericschaferguitars.com or register for a hands-on guitar building workshop here with me in Burnville, Pennsylvania.